Chapter 1. The Empty House. The house felt like a shell without her. Alex stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the familiar space that now seemed foreign. The soft floral scent of her favorite candles had faded, leaving behind only the stale odor of emptiness. His gaze lingered on the shoes by the door, neatly placed as if she might return at any moment. But he knew she wouldn't. It had been 2 weeks since the accident, but the weight of her absence hit him with fresh force every time he stepped inside. Emmeline, his M, was gone. Her laughter, once filling the house with warmth, was now just an echo in his mind. The silence was deafening. He dropped his keys on the counter and looked around the kitchen. The tea she had brewed that morning still sat untouched on the counter. He hadn't been able to throw it away, as though keeping it there might preserve a part of her. But now the sight of it felt unbearable. He sighed and sank into the chair by the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a soft glow over the quiet neighborhood. They used to sit here together, sharing late-night conversations over mugs of tea. The memory felt distant, almost unreal. Alex didn't know how to mourn her properly. People had come and gone. Friends, family, even colleagues, all offering their condolences, their pity. But no one really understood. They didn't know the way she crinkled her nose when she laughed or how her voice would soften when she spoke about her dreams. They didn't know the things she left unsaid, the things he never asked about. That thought gnawed at him. There had always been a part of Emmeline he couldn't quite reach, as though she lived with one foot in another world. It wasn't distrust or secrecy, but a quiet hesitation that he had chosen to ignore. Now he regretted it. Rising from his seat, Alex wandered through the house. His fingers brushed against the bookshelf, where she had kept her favorite novels. Jane Austen, Charlotte Bronte, Daphne du Maurier. Stories of strong women and forbidden love. He pulled one out at random and flipped through the pages. A pressed flower fell to the floor. He bent down to pick it up. A daisy, its petals fragile and faded. He smiled faintly. Emmeline had a habit of tucking little pieces of herself into everything. Notes in books, sketches on napkins, flowers pressed between pages. It was as if she wanted to leave breadcrumbs, tiny reminders of her presence. As he placed the book back on the shelf, his hand brushed against a small, ornate box tucked away in the corner. It was one he had seen before, but it had always been closed, its contents a mystery. Alex hesitated. He had never thought to ask her about it. Now, curiosity mixed with guilt as he lifted it from the shelf and carried it to the table. The lid creaked as he opened it, revealing a stack of papers tied with a ribbon. His breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable. Emmeline's delicate cursive, each letter looping gracefully. A journal. His hands trembled as he picked it up. Why had she never mentioned this? Was it private? A diary she had kept for herself, never meant for his eyes? But something urged him to open it. Perhaps it was selfish. Perhaps it was desperation. Whatever it was, Alex couldn't resist the pull. The first page was dated 5 years ago, shortly after they had moved into the house. He ran his fingers over the ink, imagining her sitting here, writing these words. Asterisk today, I watched Alex while he worked on the garden. He's always so focused, so determined. I wonder if he realizes how much I admire that about him. But sometimes, I feel like I'm standing just outside his world, looking in. There are things I want to tell him, but I don't know how. Maybe one day, asterisk. Alex's chest tightened. He had always assumed she was happy, content with their life together. But these words hinted at something deeper, something he had missed. He flipped to the next entry. Asterisk, it's not that I don't love him. I do. But there are parts of me he doesn't know. Parts of me I'm afraid to show him. If I did, would he still look at me the same way? Would he still want me? Asterisk. A lump formed in his throat. He had never doubted her love, but reading this felt like seeing her for the first time. The woman he had thought he knew so well had been carrying a quiet burden, one she hadn't shared with him. The house seemed to grow colder as he read on. Each entry was a window into her heart, revealing moments of joy, doubt, and longing that she had kept hidden. And then he saw it, a name. Asterisk, I saw him again today. He always knows what to say to make me feel seen. It's not the same as what I feel for Alex, but sometimes I wonder. If things had been different, asterisk. Alex froze. His mind raced. Who was M? A friend? A stranger? Or something more? The questions swirled in his head, threatening to consume him. He closed the journal and stared at the box, his heart pounding. Emmeline had left him with a puzzle, and he couldn't rest until he found the missing pieces. Chapter 2. The first clue. The journal sat on the table, its presence both a comfort and a torment. Alex couldn't bring himself to move it. The name, asterisk M asterisk, burned in his mind like a brand. It was just one letter, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 questions. Who was he? What role had he played in Emmeline's life? And why had she never told Alex about him? He poured himself a glass of water, his hands still trembling. The kitchen was eerily quiet, the sound of the faucet dripping the only break in the silence. He stared at the journal, debating whether to keep reading or leave it be. But he knew he couldn't stop now. Alex sat back down and flipped to the next entry, his heart pounding with every turn of the page. Asterisk, I never meant for it to get this far. M is kind. He listens in a way I didn't know I needed. But it's not what Alex thinks. It's not an affair. It's just complicated. Sometimes I feel like I can breathe around him in a way I can't with anyone else. And that terrifies me. Asterisk. Alex exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. Not an affair, the words were meant to reassure, but they felt like a flimsy shield against something deeper. Why had she been afraid to breathe around him? What had he done or not done that made her feel so suffocated? He turned the page, searching for more answers. Asterisk, Alex has been working late again. I don't blame him, he loves what he does. But sometimes I wish he'd notice the little things. Like the way I've started sleeping on the very edge of the bed, or how I've stopped humming when I cook. They're small things, but they matter to me. Am noticed. He always notices. Asterisk. The word stung. Alex leaned back in his chair, a wave of guilt washing over him. He tried to remember those nights. How many times had he brushed off her quiet mood, assuming she was just tired or distracted? How many moments had he missed because he was too wrapped up in his own world? He pushed the chair back and stood, pacing the kitchen. His mind was a storm of emotions. Guilt, anger, confusion. He wanted to hate this M, whoever he was, but part of him couldn't ignore the truth. Emmeline had needed something Alex hadn't given her. He glanced back at the journal, debating whether to read on. But before he could make up his mind, his phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from her best friend, Karen. Karen asterisk asterisk, hey Alex. Just checking in. How are you holding up? Asterisk. Alex hesitated. Karen had been Emmeline's closest confidant for years. If anyone knew about this mysterious M, it would be her. But how could he bring it up without sounding paranoid or worse, accusatory? After a moment, he typed a reply. Alex asterisk asterisk, thanks for checking in. I'm managing. Actually, there's something I've been meaning to ask you about Emmeline. Can we talk? Asterisk. The response came almost immediately. Karen asterisk asterisk, of course. Come by tomorrow? I'll make us some coffee asterisk. Alex stared at the screen, relief mingling with apprehension. Karen might hold the answers he needed, but was he ready to hear them? The next morning, Alex found himself standing outside Karen's house, clutching the journal tightly under his arm. Her home was warm and inviting, filled with soft colors and the faint scent of lavender. It was the kind of space Emmeline had always loved. Karen greeted him with a tight hug. Her eyes were red-rimmed, a reminder that she was grieving too. I've been worried about you, she said, leading him into the kitchen. You've been so quiet these past weeks. I've been trying to figure things out, Alex admitted, setting the journal on the table. Karen's eyes flicked to it, her expression shifting slightly. Is that hers? He nodded. I found it a few nights ago. She wrote about someone. Someone named M. Do you know who that is? Karen's face froze for a moment, then softened into something unreadable. She took a sip of her coffee, buying herself time. I knew she had a lot on her mind, Karen said carefully. But, I don't know. Maybe it was just a friend? You know how she liked to talk to people, find connections. Karen, Alex said, his voice firmer. She wrote about him more than once. She said he understood her in ways I didn't. Please, if you know something, just tell me. Karen looked away, her fingers tightening around her mug. I think you might be better off asking her therapist. Therapist? Karen winced. I thought you knew. She started seeing someone last year. She said it helped her process some things she didn't want to burden you with. Alex felt a knot tighten in his chest. She never told me. Karen hesitated, then added softly, maybe she didn't want you to feel like you'd failed her. You meant everything to her, Alex. I know that much. The words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened the ache in his heart. Alex thanked Karen and left, the journal still clutched in his hands. As he drove home, his mind churned with questions. Who was this therapist? What had Emmeline shared with them that she couldn't share with him? And could they hold the key to understanding who M really was? The next step was clear, but the answers felt further away than ever. Chapter 3. The Therapist's Door. The rain began to fall as Alex parked his car outside the unassuming brick building. It was tucked away at the end of a quiet street, almost hidden by tall oaks and ivy. The brass plaque by the entrance read, Dr. Margaret Harlow, licensed therapist. Alex hesitated, gripping the journal tightly in his lap. He had no idea what he was walking into. Would Dr. Harlow even speak to him? Was it ethical to ask? A part of him felt like an intruder, prying into a world Emmeline had deliberately kept private. But the unanswered questions gnawed at him, and he couldn't ignore the pull of her words. Taking a deep breath, Alex stepped out of the car and made his way to the door. Inside, the waiting room was small but inviting, with muted earth tones and soft instrumental music playing in the background. A woman in her 60s sat behind the reception desk, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She looked up as Alex approached, her expression calm but curious. Good afternoon. Do you have an appointment? She asked. No, I don't, Alex admitted, clearing his throat. My name is Alex Carter. My wife, Emmeline Carter, was one of Dr. Harlow's patients. She passed away recently. The woman's face softened with sympathy. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mr. Carter. Thank you, Alex said, his voice tight. I know it's unconventional, but I was hoping to speak with Dr. Harlow. It's important. The receptionist hesitated, then gave him a small nod. Let me see if she's available. Please have a seat. Alex sat on the edge of the chair, his nerves coiled tight. He traced the edges of the journal with his fingertips, willing himself to stay calm. A few minutes later, a tall woman with kind eyes and a composed demeanor stepped into the room. Mr. Carter, she said, extending her hand. I'm Dr. Harlow. I'm so sorry to hear about Emmeline. Thank you, Alex replied, standing to shake her hand. I know this is unusual, but I need your help. There are things about Emmeline I didn't know, things she wrote about in her journal. I think you might be able to help me understand. Dr. Harlow's gaze flickered to the journal in his hands, her expression unreadable. Why don't we step into my office? The office was warm and serene, with soft lighting and bookshelves lining the walls. Alex took a seat across from Dr. Harlow, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. Mr. Carter, she began gently, I understand this must be a difficult time for you, but I want to be clear. Anything Emmeline shared with me during our sessions is confidential. I can't disclose specific details without her permission. I understand, Alex said quickly, but maybe you can help me in a broader sense. I found her journal after she passed, and she wrote about someone, She said he understood her in ways I didn't. I need to know who he was. Dr. Harlow's expression softened, but she didn't look surprised. Emmeline often spoke about her feelings of being misunderstood. She struggled with expressing her deeper emotions, even to the people she loved most. Alex felt a pang of guilt. She wrote that she felt like she couldn't breathe around me sometimes, that she was afraid to show me parts of herself. I don't understand. I loved her. I thought I made her feel safe. Love doesn't always mean understanding, Dr. Harlow said gently. Emmeline may have felt pressure to live up to your expectations, even if you never intended to place them on her. Sometimes we hide parts of ourselves out of fear of being judged, fear of disappointing the people we care about. Alex swallowed hard. And this M? Was he someone else? Dr. Harlow hesitated, choosing her words carefully. From what Emmeline shared, M wasn't a lover. He was someone who gave her a sense of perspective, someone who helped her see herself more clearly. But I believe her feelings for him were complicated. Who was he? Alex pressed. Did she ever tell you his name? She didn't, Dr. Harlow admitted. But she often spoke of him in metaphorical terms. She described him as a mirror, someone who reflected her inner self back to her. She didn't see him as a replacement for you, Alex. She loved you deeply. But she struggled with the idea that love wasn't enough to make her whole. The words hit Alex like a blow. He had always thought their love was enough, that it could weather anything. But now he realized how little he truly understood about the battles Emmeline had been fighting. Did she ever say she was unhappy with me? He asked quietly. No, Dr. Harlow said firmly. She wasn't unhappy with you. She was unhappy with herself. And that's why she came to therapy, to find a way to reconcile the two. Alex nodded, though his heart felt heavier than ever. Thank you, Dr. Harlow. I appreciate your honesty. As he stood to leave, Dr. Harlow added, Alex, sometimes the answers we're looking for aren't as simple as a name or a moment. Emmeline's journey was her own, and so is yours. Don't lose yourself in trying to uncover every piece of her. Focus on what she left behind, the parts of her she gave to you. Alex nodded again, her words echoing in his mind as he left the office. That evening, back at the house, Alex sat at the kitchen table with the journal open in front of him. He stared at the page, his eyes lingering on Emmeline's words. *M isn't a threat. He's a question I don't know how to answer. *. He closed the journal, his thoughts churning. The answers weren't coming as easily as he'd hoped. But he couldn't stop now. There was more to discover, more to understand. And he wasn't ready to let her go just yet. Chapter 4. The Forgotten Letter. The house had grown quiet over the past weeks. Too quiet. Without Emmeline's soft laughter or the sound of her humming as she cooked, every creak of the floorboards felt like an echo of what was missing. Alex found himself wandering from room to room, searching for something he couldn't quite name. That night, as rain lashed against the windows, he decided to finally sort through the boxes in the attic. They had been there for years, mostly filled with keepsakes from Emmeline's life before they met. He had always promised her they'd go through them together, but life had a way of making such promises feel distant and unimportant. The attic smelled faintly of dust and cedarwood. Alex climbed the ladder, the old wooden rungs creaking beneath his weight. A single light bulb illuminated the space, casting long shadows across the piles of boxes and forgotten belongings. One by one, Alex began opening them. Most were filled with old photo albums, childhood drawings, and letters from friends. But then he found a small wooden chest at the back of the attic, its lock rusted and brittle with age. He pried it open with a screwdriver, the lid creaking as it gave way. Inside, beneath a stack of faded postcards, he found an envelope. It was addressed to Emmeline in delicate handwriting he didn't recognize. The return address was missing, but what caught Alex's eye was the faint scent of lavender that still clung to the paper. Lavender, her favorite scent. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written on cream-colored stationery. My dearest Emmeline, it's strange, isn't it, how some connections feel inevitable, like we were meant to find each other in this chaotic world? I don't know if I've told you this, but you've changed the way I see everything, the way I see myself. You once told me that you felt like you were standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown, afraid to jump. I want you to know that no matter where you go, or what you choose, I'll always be here, a step behind you, ready to catch you if you fall. But I also know you're torn. I see it in your eyes every time you speak about him. It's not my place to say what's right or wrong, but I hope you'll allow yourself the space to figure out what truly makes you happy. You deserve that, Emmeline. You deserve everything. Forever yours, M. The letter slipped from Alex's hands, falling softly onto the floor. Forever yours. The words rang in his ears, sharp and piercing. This wasn't just a fleeting acquaintance or a passing friendship. Whoever M. was, he had a profound hold on Emmeline's heart. Alex sat down heavily on the attic floor, his chest tight. He tried to make sense of it, but every thought felt like a betrayal. Had she been in love with someone else? Or was this letter simply the reflection of her inner turmoil, a relationship that existed more in emotion than reality? He picked up the letter again, studying the handwriting. It was elegant, refined, like the writer had taken great care with every word. It didn't feel rushed or impulsive. This was someone who had thought deeply about Emmeline, someone who had seen sides of her that Alex never could. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the roof in a relentless rhythm. Alex sat in the attic for what felt like hours, the letter clutched in his hand as he replayed everything he'd read in the journal. M isn't a threat. He's a question I don't know how to answer, but what if she had answered it? The next morning, Alex decided to search through her belongings more thoroughly. There had to be more, another clue, another piece of the puzzle. He couldn't stop now, not when he was this close to uncovering the truth. He started with her wardrobe, going through every drawer and pocket. In the bottom of one drawer, tucked beneath a pile of scarves, he found a small key. It was simple, with no markings, but it looked new. His pulse quickened as he turned it over in his hands. What did it unlock? Alex scoured the house, testing the key on every drawer, every chest, every cabinet. Nothing. Frustrated, he sat down at the edge of their bed, the key clutched in his palm. And then he remembered the storage unit. Years ago, Emmeline had rented it when they were downsizing, insisting there were things she couldn't part with but didn't need in the house. He hadn't thought about it in years. Grabbing the key and the journal, Alex headed out. The storage facility was a nondescript building on the edge of town. The fluorescent lights flickered as Alex walked down the narrow corridor, the key clinking softly in his pocket. When he found the unit number, his heart was pounding. The lock slid open easily, the door creaking as he pushed it up. Inside was a single trunk. It was old, with leather straps and brass hinges. Alex knelt beside it, the key fitting perfectly into the lock. The trunk opened with a soft click. Inside, he found a neatly folded bundle of letters, each tied with a lavender ribbon. There were dozens of them, all addressed to Emmeline in the same elegant handwriting. As Alex picked up the first letter, a faint sob escaped his lips. She had kept them all. Chapter 5, The Lavender Letters. The trunk sat before Alex like a Pandora's box, holding within it answers he both craved and feared. The lavender ribbon trembled in his hands as he untied the first bundle of letters, its faded scent rising like a ghost from the past. Each envelope was addressed to Emmeline, and the handwriting, now achingly familiar, seemed to breathe life into M with every curve and flourish. Alex opened the first letter with trembling fingers, his breath catching as he unfolded the paper. My dearest Emmeline, today, as you sat across from me, you spoke about the walls you've built around your heart. I wanted to reach across the space between us, to tell you that I see through the cracks in those walls, to the light you try so hard to hide. But I didn't. I didn't want to break the fragile silence that felt like it belonged only to us. I wonder sometimes if we met too late, if there's another world, another life where timing wasn't our enemy. You once told me that love should be simple, that it should feel like a safe harbor. But maybe love isn't always a harbor. Sometimes, it's a storm that leaves us stripped bare, exposing everything we are and everything we fear. I don't know what you'll do with the truth I've shared with you, but I hope you know that no matter where you go, my heart will carry the imprint of you forever. Yours, M. Alex set the letter down, his mind spinning. The words were tender, poetic, and undeniably intimate. Whoever M was, he had shared a connection with Emmeline that Alex hadn't known existed, a connection she had hidden from him. He reached for the second letter, unable to stop himself. Emmeline, I keep replaying the moment when you told me about your dreams. How you used to imagine a life where you could be free of expectations, free of the roles you've been forced to play. I wanted to tell you that you're already free, that you've always been more courageous than you realize. But I held back, afraid that my words might feel like a weight instead of a gift. I know you love him. I see it in the way your face softens when you speak of him. But I also see the parts of you that remain hidden, even from yourself. I don't know if you'll ever be able to show him those parts, but I hope you find the strength to try. You deserve to be seen, Emmeline. Truly seen. Alex let the letter slip from his fingers. The words cut deeper than he expected, slicing through layers of grief and anger to reveal a painful truth. Emmeline had been living a life that wasn't fully hers. She had been a wife, a partner, a friend. But there were pieces of her soul that had remained locked away, even from him. The letters weren't just a reflection of a connection she had with M. They were a window into her own struggles, her own fears. Alex leaned back against the wall, staring at the open trunk. There were dozens more letters, each one a potential key to understanding the woman he thought he had known. But he hesitated, the weight of the revelations threatening to overwhelm him. Did he want to read them all? Did he want to uncover every secret, every unspoken truth that Emmeline had kept from him? Or was it better to leave some mysteries untouched, to remember her as the woman he had loved rather than the woman he hadn't fully known? His thoughts were interrupted by the buzzing of his phone. It was Clara, Emmeline's sister. "Alex," Clara said when he answered, her voice filled with concern. "I've been meaning to call you. I came across something while sorting through Mom's things. It's a photo of Emmeline. With a man I don't recognize." Alex's grip on the phone tightened. "What kind of photo?" "It's nothing scandalous," Clara said quickly. "They're just sitting together. But the way they're looking at each other, I thought you might want to see it. I can send it over." Alex hesitated. "Please do." A few moments later, the photo appeared on his screen. It was a candid shot of Emmeline sitting at an outdoor cafe, her face lit up in laughter. Beside her was a man with sharp features and a warm smile, leaning in as if he couldn't bear to miss a single word she said. Alex's chest tightened. He didn't recognize the man, but there was something unmistakable in the way he looked at her. Something that echoed the intimacy of the letters. "Do you know who he is?" Alex asked Clara. "No," she replied. "The photo doesn't have a date or a location, but it was tucked away in Mom's things. Maybe she knew something we didn't." Alex stared at the photo, the edges of his world tilting. The letters, the journal, the photo, they were all pieces of a puzzle that refused to come together. Who was this man? And how deep did his connection with Emmeline truly go? That night, Alex sat at the kitchen table, the photo and the letters spread out before him. He felt like a man standing at the edge of an abyss, unsure whether to take the leap or turn back. As he picked up another letter, his resolve hardened. He needed to know the truth, whatever it cost him, however much it hurt. He had to uncover the full story of Emmeline and M, because only then could he truly understand the woman he had loved, and perhaps, in some small way, find a way to let her go. Chapter 6. Shadows of a Stranger. The letters haunted Alex, even in his dreams. The words bled into his subconscious, filling his mind with images of Emmeline and a man whose face he couldn't fully see. He woke up restless, clutching the photograph Clara had sent him, the mystery of the stranger gnawing at him like a wound that refused to heal. The next morning, Alex found himself staring at the letters again, his coffee untouched on the table. The bundle was smaller now. He had read through most of them over the last few days. Each letter revealed more about M. His tenderness, his admiration, his willingness to accept Emmeline without condition. But there were still no clues about who he was. No last name, no address, just an enigmatic M. Alex grabbed the photo again and studied it more closely. The man looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, with a confident posture and a hint of charm in his expression. But nothing about him felt familiar. Then Alex's gaze shifted to the cafe in the background. The sign above the door read La Forêt in elegant cursive. He froze. That was the little café Emmeline had loved in Paris. The one she had begged him to visit with her, but he had always been too busy to make the trip. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. If the photo was taken in Paris, then M might have been someone she met there. Determined to find answers, Alex pulled out his laptop and began digging through old records, emails, and receipts. Emmeline had traveled to Paris twice during their marriage, once for work and once with her sister. Clara had mentioned that trip in passing years ago, describing it as a girl's getaway. But had it really been? Scrolling through Emmeline's emails, Alex found messages between her and Clara about the trip. Everything seemed innocent at first, lists of museums to visit, restaurants to try. But then Alex found a single email that made his heart stop. Subject * change of plans. From * Emmeline to * Clara. Hey Clara, I know we planned to stay together at the hotel all week, but something's come up, and I'll be spending a few days on my own. Don't worry, it's nothing bad. Just something I need to do for myself. I'll explain later. Love you, M. Alex stared at the screen, his stomach churning. What had she meant by something I need to do for myself? And why hadn't Clara ever mentioned this? Without thinking, he dialed Clara's number. Alex, she answered, her voice laced with surprise. I need to ask you about the trip to Paris, Alex said, his tone sharper than he intended. Paris? Clara sounded confused. What about it? Did Emmeline ever tell you what she was doing when she left the hotel for those few days? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. She didn't leave the hotel, Clara finally said. Yes, she did. She sent you an email about it. Alex, that doesn't make sense, Clara replied, her voice tinged with concern. We were together the whole time. She never left my side. Alex's heart began to race. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure, Clara insisted. I would have remembered something like that. Alex ended the call in a daze. Why would Emmeline send that email if she hadn't left Clara's side? Determined to uncover the truth, Alex went back to the letters. He skimmed through them until he found one dated around the same time as the Paris trip. My dearest Emmeline, these days we've spent together feel like stolen moments from a dream. I know it can't last, but I can't help wishing we could stay here, in this beautiful city, where no one knows us and nothing feels real. When I watch you laugh under the glow of the Eiffel Tower or sip coffee at our little cafe, I see a version of you that feels free. Free from the weight of everything waiting for you back home. I don't want to be selfish, but I can't deny how much I'll miss you when this is over. I hope you'll keep these memories with you as I will. Yours always, M. The letter confirmed Alex's worst fears. Emmeline hadn't just met M in Paris. She had been with him. He felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under him. Everything he thought he knew about his marriage was unraveling, replaced by fragments of a life Emmeline had kept hidden. Later that evening, Alex decided to revisit the cafe in Paris. He booked a flight for the following week, determined to retrace Emmeline's steps and confront the shadows of her past. As he packed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a story he wasn't meant to read. A story that might shatter what little remained of the love he had for her. Paris, 1 week later. The city was exactly as Emmeline had described it in her journal. Vibrant, romantic, and impossibly alive. Alex wandered through the streets until he found La Forêt, the cafe from the photograph. He ordered a coffee and sat at one of the outdoor tables, scanning the faces around him as though one of them might belong to them. Hours passed, and nothing happened. But just as Alex was about to leave, a woman approached his table. She was older, with kind eyes and a warm smile. Excuse me, she said in lightly accented English. You've been sitting here for quite some time. Are you waiting for someone? Alex hesitated. Not exactly. I'm looking for answers. The woman tilted her head thoughtfully. Sometimes, answers come when you least expect them. Before he could respond, she pulled a notebook from her bag and handed it to him. She left this here years ago, the woman explained. I kept it, thinking she might return for it one day. But she never did. Alex opened the notebook, his breath catching when he saw Emmeline's handwriting. On the first page, she had written a single sentence. Asterisk sometimes, love isn't about who stays. It's about who lets you go. Asterisk. Chapter 7 echoes in the notebook. The weight of the notebook in Alex's hands was almost unbearable. It felt as though it pulsed with Emmeline's presence, as if her very essence had been captured in the pages. He looked up to thank the woman, but she was already gone, disappearing into the bustle of the Parisian streets like a ghost sent to deliver this fragment of his wife's life. Alex stared at the first sentence for what felt like an eternity. Asterisk sometimes, love isn't about who stays. It's about who lets you go. Asterisk. The words felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Was this how Emmeline had justified her connection to them? Had she written this as an excuse for her betrayal, or as an explanation for something even deeper? He flipped to the next page, his hands shaking. Paris, Day 1. The air smells like freedom here, or maybe it's just the absence of responsibility, of expectation. I feel lighter, like I've left a piece of myself back home. Today, I sat at La Forêt, sipping coffee and watching strangers pass by. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. A man sitting at the next table smiled at me. It wasn't a flirtatious smile, but a warm one, like he could see me, the real me. I don't know why, but I smiled back. Alex's heart clenched. This was it, the beginning of whatever had unfolded between Emmeline and M. He turned the page, dreading what he might find next. Paris, Day 3. His name is Marcus. He's a writer, here to finish a book he's been working on for years. We talked for hours today, first at the cafe and then as we walked along the Seine. He asked me questions no one's ever asked before. Questions about my dreams, my fears, the pieces of me I've always kept hidden. It felt strange and exhilarating to be seen so clearly. I told him about Alex. I told him I loved my husband, but that sometimes love can feel like a cage. He didn't judge me. He just listened. Marcus. The name hit Alex like a hammer. Finally, M had a name. But instead of bringing relief, it only deepened the ache in his chest. He skimmed through the following entries, unable to stop himself, even as each word felt like a blow. Paris, Day 5. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't come here looking for something, or someone, but Marcus makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. We kissed today. It was soft, tentative, like we were both afraid of what it meant. I wanted to pull away, to tell him it was a mistake, but I couldn't. Alex closed the notebook, his breath ragged. He felt like he was drowning in her words, in the life she had hidden from him. He stood abruptly, leaving his coffee untouched as he walked through the streets of Paris. The city that Emmeline had described as magical now felt suffocating, its charm tainted by the secrets it had kept for so long. Later that evening, Alex sat in his hotel room, the notebook open on the bed. He had read through most of it now, piecing together the story of Emmeline and Marcus. It wasn't just an affair. It was something deeper, something that had changed Emmeline in ways Alex was only beginning to understand. He reached the final entry, written just before Emmeline returned home. Paris, last day. Marcus told me he loved me today. He asked me to stay. For a moment I considered it. I imagined a life with him, free from the expectations and responsibilities that have always weighed me down. But then I thought of Alex. I thought of the life we've built together, the love we've shared. And I realized something. Love isn't about running away when things get hard. It's about staying, even when it hurts. So I said goodbye to Marcus. I'll carry the memory of him with me, but my heart belongs to Alex. It always has. Alex sat in stunned silence, the final words reverberating in his mind. She had chosen him. Despite everything, despite the connection she had found with Marcus, she had come back to him. But the knowledge brought no comfort. If she had chosen him, why hadn't she told him about Marcus? Why had she kept it all locked away, hidden in journals and letters? And why had she spent the final years of her life so distant, so unreachable? The next morning, Alex returned to La Forêt. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to find. Answers, closure, maybe even Marcus himself. As he sat at the same table Emmeline had described in her journal, a man approached. He was older now, with streaks of gray in his hair, but Alex recognized him immediately. "Marcus?" he asked, his voice tight. The man hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, and you must be Alex." They stared at each other in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. "I found her letters," Alex finally said. "Her journal. I know everything." Marcus's expression softened, a mixture of sadness and understanding in his eyes. "Then you know she loved you. She always loved you." Alex swallowed hard. "If that's true, why didn't she tell me about you?" Marcus sighed, sitting down across from Alex. "Because she was afraid. Afraid you'd see her differently. Afraid you'd leave." "Did you ever try to contact her after she came back?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "She made her choice. I respected that." Alex leaned back in his chair, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He didn't know what he had expected from this meeting, but it hadn't been this. "Did she ever regret it?" he asked quietly. Marcus hesitated, then shook his head. "No. She carried the memory of what we shared, but she never regretted going back to you. She loved you, Alex, even when it hurt." That night, Alex sat by the Seine, the city lights reflecting on the water. He thought of Emmeline, of Marcus, of the woman he had loved and the woman he was only now beginning to understand. He didn't have all the answers, and maybe he never would. But as he watched the river flow, he felt something shift inside him. A sense of peace, fragile but real. Emmeline's story was one of love, loss, and choices, and now it was his to carry. Chapter 8. The Weight of Two Worlds. The conversation with Marcus lingered in Alex's mind, replaying in fragments like a half-forgotten dream. Every word felt like a missing puzzle piece, yet the picture it formed was far from complete. He returned to his hotel room that evening, unsure whether he had gained closure or unearthed an even deeper wound. The notebook sat on the nightstand, its frayed edges and worn cover a testament to the years it had been hidden away. Alex stared at it, his fingers brushing over the spine. He had read through the journal already, or so he thought, but something urged him to flip through it one more time. As he did, a folded piece of paper fell out from between the pages and landed on the floor. Alex froze, staring at it as though it were a living thing. Carefully, he picked it up and unfolded it. "To the one I could never truly leave behind. If you're reading this, it means you've found the part of me I was too afraid to share while I was alive. I can only hope it brings you closer to understanding, even if it hurts. There's something I didn't write in the journal, something I didn't even tell Marcus. You see, Alex, there were moments when I felt torn between two worlds. The life we built together and the life I imagined with him. But in the end, it wasn't really a choice. I chose you because you were my home. You were my constant. Even when the fire of passion faded, the steady warmth of your love kept me grounded. But here's the truth I was too scared to tell you. Loving you sometimes made me feel like I was losing myself. I don't say this to hurt you. I say it because it's the truth I couldn't admit when I was alive. I spent years trying to reconcile the woman I was with the woman I wanted to be. And for all his faults, Marcus helped me see a version of myself I'd forgotten. But I didn't stay with him, Alex. I came back to you, hoping we could find that version of me together. I know I wasn't perfect. I know I hurt you in ways you may never forgive. But I hope, in time, you'll see that every choice I made, right or wrong, was rooted in love. I wish I'd told you all of this sooner. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything, or maybe it would have changed everything. I love you, Alex. I always have. M*****. The words blurred as tears filled Alex's eyes. He sank onto the bed, the letter trembling in his hands. Her honesty was a double-edged sword, cutting him open even as it soothed his long festering wounds. For the first time, he saw the cracks in their marriage not as failures but as the natural wear and tear of two imperfect people trying to navigate life together. But it didn't erase the pain of her secrets. It didn't undo the years he had spent feeling like he wasn't enough for her. The next morning, Alex decided he needed to visit one last place before leaving Paris. The cemetery where Marcus had said Emmeline had gone to reflect during her trip. It was a quiet place, tucked away from the noise of the city. Alex walked among the headstones until he found a small bench under an old tree, just as Marcus had described. He sat there, letting the stillness wash over him. He imagined Emmeline sitting in this very spot, her thoughts a tangled web of love, guilt, and longing. Reaching into his pocket, Alex pulled out the letter and read it again, this time aloud. The words carried a different weight here, as though the air itself was absorbing her truths. When he finished, Alex folded the letter carefully and placed it on the bench beside him. It felt like the right thing to do, leaving a piece of her here, in the city that had held so much of her heart. That evening, Alex boarded his flight back home. As the plane soared above the clouds, he gazed out the window, the lights of Paris fading into the distance. Emmeline's story wasn't just hers anymore. It was his as well, woven into the fabric of their shared history. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since her death, Alex felt like he could move forward, not by letting go of her, but by carrying her memory with him in a way that didn't feel like a burden. In her own imperfect way, Emmeline had loved him, and in his own imperfect way, Alex had loved her too. Sometimes that was enough. Chapter 9, The Final Step. Alex returned home to an empty house. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as if it was still holding onto the memories of Emmeline's presence. Her laughter, her soft footsteps echoing in the hall, her scent on the pillow. It had only been a few weeks since she passed, but in many ways it felt like a lifetime. He walked through the room slowly, his eyes lingering on the small details, things that had once seemed insignificant but now felt like the most intimate parts of her life. A coffee cup left on the counter half full. A book on the couch, its cover bent from where she had left it open. It was hard to breathe in a place that was both home and a monument to his grief. The house had once been a sanctuary, a place to retreat from the world. Now it felt like a cage. He made his way to the study where they had spent so many hours together, working side by side. There, on the desk, was the last thing he needed to face: Emmeline's phone. For weeks, he had avoided it, too afraid of what he might find. But now, with a resolve that felt foreign to him, he picked it up and turned it on. The screen lit up, displaying a text from Clara, sent the morning after Emmeline's funeral. "Alex, there's something you need to know. I don't know if it's the right time, but I can't keep this from you anymore. Emmeline made me promise not to tell you, but I think you deserve the truth." His heart skipped a beat. He tapped the message open, his fingers trembling. She was planning to leave. Before the accident. "I didn't want to tell you, but I think you need to understand." She was torn, Alex. Torn between staying and starting over. It wasn't just Marcus. It was more than that. She had been questioning everything. "I think she was finally ready to tell you everything, but she never got the chance. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." Alex's breath caught in his throat. The words swirled in his mind, each one like a slap, yet a deep, gnawing curiosity began to build in him. Why hadn't Emmeline told him herself? Why hadn't Clara said anything sooner? He ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm the storm of emotions within him. The thought of Emmeline planning to leave, even if it was before the accident, crushed him. How long had she been carrying that weight? How long had she felt this way and never spoken of it? The phone buzzed again, but this time it was a call. He stared at the screen, hesitating for a moment before answering. "Alex, I know this is hard, but I need you to listen." Clara's voice came through the speaker, tight with emotion. "You're angry and you're right to be, but I promise Emmeline loved you. She always loved you, and she was trying to find a way to heal herself. I know it might seem like betrayal, but it wasn't meant that way." Alex closed his eyes, hearing the sincerity in her voice. The guilt, the sorrow. Clara had always been protective of Emmeline, but she had always been honest too. He could tell she wasn't just trying to make excuses. She was trying to help him understand. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Clara," Alex admitted quietly, his voice breaking. "I don't know what part of Emmeline was real and what was just A lie? Clara was silent for a long time. I think the hardest part, Alex, is that Emmeline didn't lie to you. She just didn't know how to tell you the truth. I think she was so afraid that if she did, she'd lose you. Alex closed his eyes, letting her words wash over him. I wanted to help her, Clara, he whispered. I wanted to be the one she turned to. But now it feels like I wasn't enough. There was another pause. Then Clara's voice softened. You were enough, Alex. You always were. But sometimes, even the ones we love can't see the truth about themselves. They don't know how to ask for help, how to tell us they're drowning inside. Emmeline was afraid of what she might lose by telling you the whole truth. But that doesn't mean she didn't love you. She loved you with everything she had. Alex wiped his eyes, trying to steady his breath. The pain felt raw, but there was something about Clara's words that finally began to break through the wall of hurt he had been hiding behind. After a long pause, he spoke again, this time with a sense of finality in his voice. I don't think I'll ever fully understand everything about her, Clara. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some things are meant to remain mysteries. Maybe, Clara agreed softly. But that doesn't change what you had, Alex. And it doesn't change who Emmeline was. The next morning, Alex woke early, the weight of the conversation still pressing on him. He hadn't slept much, his mind turning over the fragments of Emmeline's life, the secrets and the hidden truths. He still didn't know how to move forward, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't live in the past anymore. He stood at the window of his study, looking out at the world beyond. The morning sun was rising, casting soft light across the city. Felt like a new beginning, a chance to finally heal. For the first time in a long time, Alex felt something stir inside him, an emotion he hadn't recognized in months. It wasn't pain, nor anger, nor confusion. It was peace. Perhaps it was because, in the end, he realized that the love they shared, flawed, messy, and full of unanswered questions, was real. And that, in itself, was enough. The phone rang again, but this time, Alex didn't hesitate to answer. It was Clara. I know you're trying to find closure, Alex, she said, her voice steady. But just remember, healing isn't a straight path. It's messy. It's unpredictable. But one day, you'll wake up and realize you found a way to live with the pain, to carry the love, and to honor Emmeline's memory. Don't rush it. Just let it happen when you're ready. Alex nodded, even though Clara couldn't see him. Thank you, Clara. I needed to hear that. And as the phone call ended, Alex stood still, allowing the first true sense of release he had felt in weeks to settle over him. He wasn't sure where his journey would take him next, but for the first time since Emmeline's death, he knew he could move forward, one small step at a time. Chapter 10. A New Beginning. The days following Alex's conversation with Clara passed in a blur. The weight of Emmeline's secrets still pressed on him, but there was something lighter about the air now. The tension, the sense of unfinished business, had begun to loosen, replaced by a growing understanding. One that didn't require him to have all the answers. He didn't need to know every detail of her life to honor what they had shared. Their love, flawed and imperfect as it was real. And in a way, that was enough. But even as he began to accept the things he couldn't change, Alex knew there was one thing left for him to do. It had been months since Emmeline's passing, and though he had no intention of rushing into anything, he knew it was time to stop living in the shadows of her memory. That afternoon, Alex found himself standing outside a small bookstore, its windows fogged with condensation from the winter chill. The place was quiet, almost like a hidden gem among the busy streets, the kind of place where people could get lost in the pages of books and the world outside could fade away. Inside, the smell of old paper and fresh coffee greeted him. He stepped in, scanning the shelves for a moment before making his way toward the back. There, at a small table by the window, sat Clara. She looked up as he approached, offering a small smile. "You came," she said softly. Alex nodded. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about not rushing things." Clara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And I think you were right," he said, taking a seat across from her. "Healing isn't linear. It's messy, like you said, but I think I'm ready to start moving forward. To let go of the things that have been holding me back. Clara's expression softened, and for a moment, she just watched him as if weighing his words. Finally, she spoke. It's been a long journey for you, Alex, and I know you'll never forget Emmeline. You loved her, and that love isn't something that disappears just because she's gone. But that doesn't mean you can't find happiness again. You deserve that. Alex swallowed, looking out the window for a moment before meeting her gaze again. I'm not trying to forget her, Clara. I want to find a way to live with everything. To carry the love we had without letting it consume me. Clara nodded slowly. That's all any of us can do. For a long time, they sat in silence, the warmth of the bookstore enveloping them. In that moment, Alex felt a strange peace settle in his chest. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be days of doubt, of questioning whether he had made the right choices. But he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't alone. The world outside hadn't stopped turning, and neither had he. Weeks passed, and the changes in Alex's life were subtle but undeniable. He found himself reconnecting with old friends, spending time with people who reminded him that life didn't stop when loss struck. It was messy, yes, but it was also full of moments that reminded him of the beauty still left in the world. And then, one day, as if by chance, he found himself sitting in a cafe with a woman he had met months before. Her name was Julia, a friend of a friend, and they had shared a few conversations over the course of the last few weeks. She was kind, warm, and easy to talk to, and though he hadn't intended to, Alex found himself opening up about Emmeline, about the pain, the love, and the journey he had been on since her passing. Julia listened with a quiet understanding, and when he finished speaking, she reached out, her hand gently brushing his. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through, she said. But I can see that you're healing. Slowly but surely. You've been so strong, Alex. Alex didn't know what to say at first. He wasn't sure what it meant to open his heart again. But as he looked at Julia, something in him stirred. A soft flutter of possibility. He wasn't ready to rush into anything, and he knew it wasn't fair to her to expect him to. But for the first time since Emmeline's death, Alex felt a spark of hope that perhaps there was a future beyond his grief. The weeks that followed were a gentle unfolding. Alex and Julia spent more time together, enjoying quiet afternoons, long walks, and easy conversations. And while Emmeline's memory was never far from his mind, he began to notice something new, a growing sense of peace. He didn't need to forget the past to move forward. But he did need to make room for something new, something that could bring him joy again, without diminishing the love he had for his late wife. One evening, as they sat in a quiet park, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and orange, Alex found himself reaching for Julia's hand. I'm still figuring this out, he said softly, but I think I'm ready to keep going. And maybe, just maybe, I can let someone else in. Julia smiled, squeezing his hand gently. You don't have to have all the answers. And I'm not here to rush you, Alex. But I'm glad you're letting yourself feel again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Alex realized that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about finding the strength to embrace the future, one step at a time. Alex's journey was far from over. There were still moments of sadness, of missing Emmeline, and of longing for what had been lost. But there were also moments of joy, of hope, and of new beginnings. And in the end, he knew that love, whether from Emmeline or from someone new, wasn't something to hold on to forever in the same way. It was something that could evolve, something that could grow, as long as he was willing to let it. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Alex felt ready to face it, knowing that the love he had shared with Emmeline would always remain a part of him. Just as the love he was beginning to share with Julia had the potential to be something new, something beautiful, in its own way. And maybe that was enough. Chapter 11. A full circle. The seasons changed, and with each passing day, Alex felt the grip of the past loosen just a little more. It wasn't a sudden shift, but a slow, steady process of rebuilding, of reclaiming the pieces of himself that had been lost. He had learned to live with the memory of Emmeline, not as a weight that held him down, but as a part of his history, woven into the fabric of who he was. Julia had become a constant in his life, but not in the way that rushed love sometimes does. Their connection was gentle, like the slow unfolding of a story that didn't need to be rushed. A journey they were both willing to take, step by step. She was patient with him, never demanding more than he was ready to give. One afternoon, a few months after they had started spending more time together, Alex found himself sitting on a bench in the park, staring at the water. Julia sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, her presence quiet and comforting. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice hesitant, "about Emmeline. And the way things ended." Julia shifted slightly, turning to face him. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready," she said softly. But Alex shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. "No, I think I am ready. I think I've always been ready to talk about it. I just needed to understand it better first." He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "It's strange, the way everything happened, the way I couldn't see some of the things she was struggling with. I thought I knew her so well, but there were pieces of her that she kept hidden. And I don't think I'll ever fully understand why." Julia nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. Sometimes, people don't know how to share their struggles, even with the people they love the most. It's not because they don't trust you, but because they're afraid of burdening you, or afraid of what might happen if they open up too much. Alex sighed, his eyes fixed on the rippling water in front of him. "I keep coming back to one thing. That letter I found. The one where she said she was planning to leave before everything happened. I wonder if I missed something, if there was something I could have done differently to make her feel like she could talk to me." "You're not responsible for everything, Alex," Julia said quietly. "And no one can be perfect in a relationship. But what you shared with her was real, and that's something no one can take away from you. You gave her love, and she gave you love in return, even if it wasn't always in the ways you expected." Alex turned to her, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I know. I've realized that. It's just hard sometimes, to let go of the idea that things could have been different, that I could have done more." Julia took his hand in hers, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to let go of the love you shared with Emmeline, Alex. It's always going to be part of you, and that's okay. What matters now is that you're giving yourself permission to love again in your own time, in your own way. You don't have to replace the past. You're building something new, something that exists alongside everything you've already experienced." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time in a long time, Alex felt a sense of peace. He didn't need to hold on to the past as tightly as he once had. He could cherish it, honor it, but he didn't have to be bound by it. A week later, Alex found himself standing in front of the small cafe where he and Julia had shared their first meaningful conversation. It had been months, but it felt like yesterday. The same sense of calm he had felt then washed over him now, and he smiled, realizing just how far he had come since that day. He had spent so much time trapped in the cycle of grief and guilt that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be open to new possibilities. But here he was, ready to take another step. As Julia approached, her smile lighting up her face, Alex felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about replacing Emmeline, or pretending that the love he had with her didn't matter. This was about embracing the future without losing sight of the past. It was about creating space for new memories, new experiences, while still holding the old ones close. "Hey," Julia said softly, her eyes searching his face. "Are you okay?" He smiled, the warmth in his chest reaching his eyes. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady. "I think I am. I've been doing a lot of thinking. About the past. And about us." Julia's smile widened, a hint of curiosity in her gaze. "And I'm ready, Julia. I'm ready to let go of the guilt, of the idea that I can somehow fix everything. I'm ready to build something new with you." She reached for his hand, and Alex felt a deep sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was just another chapter. Months passed, and Alex and Julia's relationship continued to grow, evolving at its own pace. There were still moments when the grief would come rushing back, when he would find himself missing Emmeline with an intensity that surprised him. But now, he could sit with those emotions without allowing them to consume him. Julia was patient, understanding when he needed space, and there were times when she would simply hold him as he worked through the feelings he hadn't even known were there. But she never tried to fix him, never pushed him to forget what had been. She simply gave him the room to be himself, allowing him to heal in his own time. And one quiet evening, as they sat together in the same park where they had shared their first conversation, Alex realized something important. He hadn't fully moved on, and he wasn't trying to. He had simply learned to carry his memories in a way that no longer felt like a burden. The love he had shared with Emmeline was still with him, just as the love he was building with Julia was slowly blossoming into something beautiful and real. For the first time, Alex understood that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning to live with the pieces of the past and embracing the beauty of what the future could hold. Chapter 12: Echoes of the Past. It had been nearly a year since Alex had first stepped into the unfamiliar territory of healing. A year since he had sat in the park with Clara, uncertain of what the future held, but hopeful nonetheless. Now, with each passing day, the sense of balance he had fought so hard to find felt more solid. Life, though still tinged with the sadness of loss, had begun to take on a new rhythm. He could wake up in the mornings without the heaviness of grief weighing him down. But there were still moments when Emmeline's absence felt like a shadow he couldn't shake. Yet it was in those quiet moments, when the world seemed to stand still, that Alex felt her presence the most. In the smell of the rain on the pavement, in the rustling of the leaves, in the way the sunlight would catch the edges of a memory. Emmeline was still with him, not as a source of sorrow, but as a part of him that had shaped who he was today. And that gave him a kind of peace, a quiet reassurance that he wasn't forgetting. He was simply learning how to carry her with him. Julia had been a steady presence, her warmth and understanding allowing Alex to explore the parts of himself that had remained hidden for so long. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when Alex found himself retreating, overwhelmed by the echoes of the past. But Julia never pressured him, never demanded he rush through his feelings. She gave him the space he needed, and in return, their connection deepened. It was during one of these moments of reflection, late on a Saturday afternoon, that Alex received a call that would stir up memories he thought he had begun to lay to rest. The name on his phone was unexpected: Sophie, Emmeline's sister. Alex, Sophie's voice was strained when he picked up. I need to talk to you. It's important." The urgency in her tone made Alex's stomach tighten. "What's going on, Sophie?" he asked, already knowing that whatever news was coming, it wasn't going to be easy to hear. "There's something you need to see," she said. "It's about Emmeline. It's a letter. A journal entry, actually. I think you should know what it says." Alex froze. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of dread and curiosity swirling together. The journal. He hadn't thought about it in months, not since he'd last read Emmeline's handwritten words in her private space. The words he'd found had already unraveled so much about her. The secrets, the pain, the depth of feelings he hadn't known she carried. What more could there possibly be? "Where are you?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm at the house," Sophie replied. "I can explain everything when you get here. But Alex, it's going to be difficult. You need to be ready." "I'll be there," he said, his words more a promise to himself than to her. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he knew he had to face it. When Alex arrived at Sophie's house, it was as if time had stopped. The house was quiet, the familiar hum of life gone, replaced by an eerie stillness that made his chest tighten. Sophie was waiting for him at the kitchen table, the same table where Emmeline had once sat with a cup of tea, laughing about something trivial, her presence so full of life that Alex could still hear her voice echoing in the back of his mind. Sophie didn't say anything as Alex sat down. Instead, she handed him a folded piece of paper, the edges worn as though it had been read over and over again. Alex unfolded it, the familiar handwriting of Emmeline on the page. He took a slow breath before reading. "I'm sorry, Alex. I don't know how to begin this, and I'm afraid you'll never truly understand. But the truth is, I've been carrying a burden for a long time, one that I can't bear to keep hidden anymore. Our love, as deep and as real as it is, has been clouded by the things I've kept from you. I love you, but I haven't always been truthful. And because of that, I'm afraid I might be losing you in ways you won't ever see coming. I don't know how to explain why I've stayed silent, why I've let you believe that everything was perfect between us when it was anything but. The truth is, I've been scared. Scared of what would happen if you knew the full story. But I think I need to say it, even if it's only to myself. I need to face it. I've loved you more than I ever thought possible, Alex. But I've also loved someone else. Someone who I can't walk away from. And I can't keep living in this lie. I need to go. I need to leave. Before it destroys me. Before it destroys us. Please don't hate me for this. Please know that my love for you was real. Even if it wasn't enough to save us from the truth. Asterisk. Alex's hands shook as he finished reading, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind raced, trying to process the words that felt like a betrayal, yet at the same time, an answer to so many questions he had buried deep within himself. Sophie was watching him closely, her expression pained. I didn't want you to find out like this, Alex. But I think you needed to know what she was really going through. The room felt impossibly small, the air thick with the weight of Emmeline's words. Alex could hardly breathe. It was as if the ground had been ripped from under him, and all the steady progress he had made in the months since Emmeline's death seemed to crumble in an instant. I don't know what to say, Alex murmured, his voice distant. I thought we had it all. I thought our love was enough. Sophie reached out, placing a hand gently on his. Alex, I'm so sorry. But the truth is, Emmeline was never able to reconcile her feelings. She loved you, yes, but there was another part of her. Another relationship she couldn't let go of. Alex's breath hitched, a flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Who? His voice barely above a whisper. Sophie looked away, her gaze focused on the table. It's complicated, but I think you deserve to know. It was someone you both knew. Someone you might never have suspected. Alex stared at the letter in his hands, the weight of it almost unbearable. This wasn't the ending he had imagined. He had believed, with every part of himself, that Emmeline had been his, only his. And now, the truth was coming to light in the most painful way imaginable. Do you think she ever truly wanted to leave? Alex asked, his voice breaking. Sophie hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I think part of her had already made that decision. The next few days were a blur. Alex found himself pacing, rereading the letter over and over again, searching for clues in Emmeline's words that would explain her actions. He couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the sense that everything he had known about their relationship had been a lie. But there was also something else, something deeper. He realized, finally, that it wasn't just about the lies or the secrets. It was about accepting that Emmeline had been a person too, with her own complexities, her own struggles that he had never fully understood. As he sat in his apartment that evening, holding the letter close to his chest, Alex knew one thing for sure. This was the final chapter of his story with Emmeline. The past was not something he could change, but it was something he could now let go of, piece by painful piece. And maybe, just maybe, he could begin to move forward again. Chapter 13. The Unraveling. The days following the revelation about Emmeline's secret love were nothing short of tumultuous. Alex had spent countless hours in the days after reading the letter, reeling from the weight of its contents. Emotions that he had thought were long buried, anger, betrayal, confusion, came crashing back in full force. But what haunted him the most was the unanswered question that echoed in his mind. Why? Why hadn't Emmeline told him? Why had she kept such a crucial part of herself hidden? The morning after reading the letter, Alex woke up with the feeling that the world around him had changed irrevocably. The apartment he had once shared with Emmeline now felt suffocating, filled with the ghosts of their past. The photos on the walls, the books on the shelves, the little knickknacks that they had collected over the years. They all seemed to mock him now, reminders of a life that had been built on something fragile. But he couldn't avoid it anymore. He had to confront the truth. For his own sake. He had left Sophie's house the night before, but the weight of the truth about Emmeline's relationship was still lingering. It gnawed at him, and the silence that had fallen between him and Julia over the past few days only deepened the sense of isolation. It wasn't that Julia had done anything wrong. Quite the opposite. She had been more patient with him than he could have ever asked for. But every time she looked at him, he felt as if she was waiting for him to tell her what was going on in his mind, waiting for him to open up about the turmoil he was feeling. And yet, every time he tried, the words just wouldn't come. He knew that the next step in his healing was facing this darkness, not letting it fester inside him. But how could he let go of the image he had built of Emmeline when this new truth had shattered it? Alex knew he had to talk to Julia. He needed her support, but more than that, he needed her to understand the depth of the confusion he was struggling with. This wasn't just about Emmeline anymore. It was about Alex and what he was willing to learn from all of this. When Alex met Julia later that day, she could tell right away that something was off. He hadn't been himself over the past few days, withdrawing into himself in a way she hadn't seen before. She had tried to give him space, but now she wasn't sure if he was shutting her out or simply overwhelmed by his emotions. "Hey," she said softly as he sat down across from her at the small cafe they often visited. "You've been distant. I'm not pushing, but I'm here if you need to talk. I want to understand." "Alex," he sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. The vulnerability in her eyes made it even harder to find the words. But he couldn't keep this inside anymore. He had to say it out loud, even if it felt like a betrayal of his own memories. "I don't know where to start," Alex began, his voice raw. "I thought I knew everything about Emmeline. I thought we had it all, our love, our life together. But I was wrong, Julia. She wasn't who I thought she was. There was another person, someone else who meant something to her. And I can't shake the feeling that I didn't know her at all." Julia's face softened with understanding, but there was a faint trace of confusion in her expression. "Another person?" she asked quietly. "Who?" Alex shook his head, the anger and pain bubbling up again as he recalled the letter. "I don't even know." Sophie, Emmeline's sister, found a letter, a journal entry from Emmeline. She admitted that there was someone else, someone she loved, and I wasn't enough to keep her. She was planning to leave me, Julia. She was going to leave before it all ended. I never knew. I thought I had been the one she'd chosen. But I wasn't. The words hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Julia remained silent for a moment, letting his confession settle into the space around them. She wasn't sure what to say, or how to make him feel better in the face of such profound betrayal. But one thing was clear. Alex was grieving not just Emmeline's death but the entire relationship, the life they had built together. He was grieving a love that had been tainted by secrets and lies. "Alex," Julia said softly, her voice gentle, "I know this is incredibly painful, but you can't hold on to the idea that you were supposed to know everything about her. People are complex, and sometimes there are things they can't or don't want to share. But it doesn't erase the love you two shared. It doesn't take away from what you had." "I know," he murmured, his voice breaking. "But the worst part is that now I feel like I don't even know what I was holding on to. Was it really love? Or was it just a facade? How can I move on from that?" Julia reached across the table, her hand brushing against his. "Love isn't about perfection. It's about the connection between two people, even when they don't have all the answers. Emmeline was a part of your life, and that's something that will always remain with you. But now, it's time for you to figure out who you are outside of her shadow." Alex looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can let go of this pain." "You don't have to let go all at once," Julia said quietly. "Take it one day at a time. And if you need me, I'm here. You're not alone, Alex. Not now, not ever." The simplicity of her words struck him in a way he hadn't expected. For the first time in what felt like forever, Alex allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe he couldn't undo the past, and maybe he would never fully understand everything that had happened between him and Emmeline. But he didn't have to face it alone. Over the next few weeks, Alex made a decision. He was going to visit Emmeline's grave again. He hadn't been back since the funeral, and he wasn't sure what he expected to find there. Closure? A sense of peace? Or perhaps just a moment to feel her presence again, even if only in spirit. When he arrived, the cemetery was quiet, the only sound being the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. He stood in front of her gravestone, the same one that had once felt so final, and allowed himself a moment to breathe. "Emmeline," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't understand everything. I don't know why you kept so much from me. But I know that I loved you, and I always will." Tears welled up in his eyes, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself to cry. Not just for the love they had shared, but for the pain of not knowing all the answers. It was a bittersweet release, but one that he knew would help him move forward. As he stood there, a sense of calm settled over him. It wasn't the peace of knowing everything, it was the peace of acceptance. He didn't have to have all the answers. He could let go of the need to control the narrative of his life and allow himself the freedom to embrace what was yet to come. When he turned to leave, he felt something shift inside him. A sense of closure, not in the way he had imagined, but in a way that allowed him to move on, to live fully again. The pain would always be a part of him, but it didn't have to define him. Chapter 14. A New Beginning. The days after visiting Emmeline's grave were quiet. Alex had returned to his routine, but the weight of the past no longer consumed him in the same way. The sadness, the anger, the confusion, they were still there, but they felt like shadows, lingering but not controlling him. With each passing day, Alex found a little more peace in the uncertainty of it all. He couldn't erase the past, couldn't rewrite his story, but he could move forward. It was a strange comfort, understanding that some things were never meant to be fully understood. Some wounds would heal on their own in time. Julia had been a constant in his life during this period of transition. He appreciated her more than words could express. She hadn't rushed him to get over his grief, hadn't pressured him into some kind of quick resolution. Instead, she simply was there, offering her presence and her quiet understanding. It was a gentle comfort, but one that allowed Alex to feel safe again, to start dreaming about the future instead of being trapped in the memories of the past. But despite the growing closeness between him and Julia, Alex had noticed something shifting inside of him. A new awareness, a question that had been lingering at the back of his mind. Was he ready to open his heart again? Was he ready to love someone else? One evening, as the city hummed quietly beneath the setting sun, Alex and Julia sat together on the rooftop of his apartment building, sipping tea and talking about everything and nothing at all. The city skyline stretched out in front of them, bathed in the golden light of dusk. Julia was talking animatedly about an article she was writing, but Alex wasn't really listening. His mind was elsewhere, lost in thought. He was still thinking about what Sophie had said, the part about Emmeline loving someone else. He had tried to let go of the anger, the sense of betrayal, but it lingered, always present, lurking just beneath the surface. "Alex!" Julia's voice brought him back to the present, soft but insistent. "What's on your mind?" Alex hesitated, unsure whether to voice the thought that had been gnawing at him for days. He didn't want to hurt her, didn't want to make things complicated. But it felt like the right moment to ask, to see where he stood. "Do you think we can ever truly move on from the past?" he asked, his voice low. "From all the things that have happened? The things we carry with us?" Julia studied him for a moment, her eyes searching his face as if she could read the depths of his soul. Finally, she gave a soft smile and placed her hand gently over his. "I think we can move forward, yes," she said thoughtfully. "But moving on is different. We never completely forget. We carry pieces of our past with us. Our experiences, the people we loved, the pain we felt. But we don't have to let it define us. It's about finding balance, about learning to live with what we've been through." Alex nodded slowly, feeling a sense of understanding settle over him. He had been so focused on moving on letting go, that he had neglected to see that moving forward didn't mean erasing the past. It meant accepting it and building something new from it. The following days were a quiet reckoning for Alex. The questions that had plagued him for so long began to lose their grip on him. He could still feel Emmeline's presence, still carry her memory with him, but he didn't need to hold onto the hurt anymore. He didn't need to make sense of every moment they had shared. Instead, he focused on the present, on the small moments that made life beautiful. And as he spent more time with Julia, Alex began to realize something. He was ready to try again. He wasn't sure what it would look like or how it would unfold, but he felt a growing sense of peace in his heart. He wasn't replacing Emmeline, nor was he erasing their love, but he was allowing himself to feel something new. Julia sensed the change in him, too. She could see the way his posture had shifted, the way his smiles came more easily, the way he looked at her with a new openness. It wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about embracing a future that felt uncertain but full of possibilities. One evening, as they sat on the same rooftop where they had shared countless conversations, Alex turned to Julia with a quiet intensity. The stars were just beginning to appear in the sky, a canvas of soft, shimmering lights stretching out above them. "Julia," Alex began, his voice soft but steady, "I've been thinking about us, about everything, and I want to be honest with you. I'm not completely healed. I don't think anyone ever truly is, not fully. But I want to give this a chance. I want to see where we can go, together." Julia's heart skipped a beat. She had been waiting for him to say something like this, but hearing it out loud filled her with a warmth that spread through her chest. "I've always been here, Alex," she said, her voice gentle but full of meaning. "I'm not going anywhere, and you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all the answers. I'm here with you, wherever this journey takes us." Alex smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached his eyes. He felt lighter, freer than he had in months, knowing that Julia wasn't expecting him to be anything other than himself. In the weeks that followed, Alex and Julia continued to grow closer, their bond deepening with every shared experience, every quiet moment of understanding. Alex found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected, sharing more about his past, about the grief he had carried, and about the love he still held for Emmeline. But now, he also made space for the love he was beginning to feel for Julia. It was different from what he had experienced before, calmer, steadier, but no less powerful. And that was enough. Emmeline would always be a part of his story. Her memory, the love they shared, the loss that had shaped him, they would stay with him. But Alex was no longer defined by them. He was his own person with a future that was full of promise. And with Julia by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 15. A Love Rekindled. It had been months since Alex had made peace with Emmeline's memory. Months since he had accepted that the past, with all its secrets and wounds, was part of him but not all of him. And in those months, his connection with Julia had blossomed in ways that surprised him. He hadn't expected to fall in love again. Not so soon, not with someone like her. Yet here he was, standing at the threshold of something new, something he wasn't sure he was ready for, but couldn't walk away from. Julia had been patient with him. She hadn't pressured him to move faster, to change, or to forget what had come before. She had simply been there, holding his hand through the quiet moments and the turbulent ones. And in return, Alex had given her more of himself with each passing day. He had slowly stopped hiding behind walls, stopped retreating into the grief that had once consumed him. They were, in many ways, two people learning to love again, learning what it meant to build something real, something lasting, after everything had been torn apart. But despite the healing, the love they were building still carried an undercurrent of uncertainty. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. It wasn't Julia's fault. No, she was everything he had needed in those dark days. But as they spent more time together, Alex started to realize that he had been holding back. He had never truly let himself be vulnerable with her, not in the way he had been with Emmeline, not in the way that allowed for true, raw connection. One afternoon, as they sat in the park together, Alex found himself staring at Julia, feeling an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. She was laughing at something he had said, her eyes sparkling with joy, her lips curling into a smile that made his heart beat a little faster. She was beautiful inside and out, and yet, as he watched her, a quiet ache settled within him. "I think there's something you're not telling me," Julia said suddenly, her voice teasing. You've been acting all mysterious lately. What's going on in that head of yours? Alex chuckled, though it was a little forced. He had been hiding, even from her. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he was afraid of repeating the same mistakes, of trusting someone with a piece of himself that wasn't fully healed. Maybe he was afraid that, just like with Emmeline, he would wake up one day and find that everything had changed again. But Julia had been patient, and he owed it to her to be honest. I've been thinking a lot, he said, his voice quiet. About us. About me. And I don't know if I'm ready for everything yet. But I know that I don't want to lose you. Julia's expression softened. She set her drink down and looked at him seriously. Alex, you don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to rush anything. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I just want you to be here. With me. He felt a lump form in his throat, and for a moment, words escaped him. His heart was beating so loudly in his chest. His mind racing with thoughts he didn't know how to say out loud. I love you, Julia, Alex finally said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. I love you, and I'm scared. I'm scared that I'll mess this up, scared that I'll disappoint you. But I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to be with you. The weight of those words hit him like a tidal wave, and for a moment, it felt like everything stopped. He had said them. He had opened his heart to her, despite the fear and uncertainty that had lingered for so long. Julia's face lit up with a soft, knowing smile, and she reached for his hand. I love you too, Alex. I've loved you for a long time now, in the quiet ways that don't need to be explained. But I'm not going anywhere. You don't need to be afraid of losing me. Alex felt a profound sense of relief, as if the chains that had bound him for so long had suddenly fallen away. In that moment, he realized that he wasn't alone anymore. Julia was with him, and they were in this together, whatever it was, whatever it became. Days turned into weeks, and Alex found himself slowly, steadily, rebuilding his life. He and Julia spent their evenings cooking dinner together, going on long walks through the city, and sharing dreams of the future that had once seemed so distant. There were still moments of doubt, still flashes of the pain he had carried for so long, but they were less frequent now. With Julia by his side, Alex had begun to believe in the possibility of happiness again. But even as things began to settle, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking beneath the surface. He had finally started to feel like he was letting go of Emmeline, that he could move forward without feeling like he was betraying her memory. But the guilt never fully dissipated. Every time he kissed Julia, every time he held her close, there was a part of him that still felt like he was betraying something. Someone. One evening, after a particularly wonderful dinner, the two of them walked along the riverbank, the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off the water. Julia was talking animatedly about a book she had recently read, but Alex's mind was elsewhere, caught in the current of his own thoughts. Alex! Julia's voice broke through his thoughts again. You've been quiet tonight. What's going on in that head of yours? He looked over at her, her face illuminated by the soft light. The question was simple, but it felt like a turning point. He realized, then, that he hadn't fully let go of the past. Not just of Emmeline, but of the part of himself that he had buried deep inside. His fear, his guilt, and his doubts. I'm still trying to figure things out, Alex admitted, his voice soft but sincere. There's a part of me that's afraid to let go. Afraid that if I let myself love you fully, I'll lose everything else. Julia stopped walking and turned to face him, her eyes filled with understanding. Alex, she said gently, loving me doesn't mean you're forgetting Emmeline. It just means you're allowing yourself to live, to love, to be free. You don't have to carry the weight of everything alone. I'm here. I've always been here. Her words struck him deeply, and for the first time in months, Alex felt the last of the chains that had held him in place loosen. He wasn't betraying anyone. He wasn't replacing anything. He was simply moving forward, honoring the past but no longer letting it dictate his future. As they continued their walk along the river, hand in hand, Alex felt a sense of peace wash over him. The past, with all its complexities and pain, would always be a part of him. But so would the love he had found with Julia. and for the first time in a long time he believed that it was enough. Chapter 16, Crossing Paths. The weeks continued to flow by with a quiet rhythm, each day blending seamlessly into the next. Alex found himself in a place he hadn't thought possible. A place of peace. He had never imagined that he could feel so whole again, especially after everything he'd gone through. But with Julia by his side, it seemed like the broken pieces were finally starting to fit back together. He could feel the love growing between them, steadily, beautifully, without any of the uncertainty or fear that had once weighed him down. They had both been broken in their own ways, but together, they seemed to create something stronger than either of them had been alone. But despite the deepening connection he felt with Julia, there were moments when Alex found himself thinking about Emmeline, not in the way he used to, full of rage and heartbreak, but in a quieter, more reflective way. He wondered what she would have thought of Julia. He wondered what would have happened if their paths had never crossed. Would he still be here now with Julia? Or would he have continued down a different road, one paved by the ghosts of the past? These thoughts lingered in the corners of his mind, but he pushed them aside whenever they threatened to consume him. He had made his peace with the past, and he was ready to embrace the future. He couldn't keep second-guessing every decision, every choice he had made. Life was too short for that. One afternoon, as Alex and Julia sat at a cafe near the park, chatting about their plans for the weekend, Alex noticed a figure across the room that made his stomach twist. The woman was seated at a table by herself, her posture poised, her eyes scanning the room. Alex felt an inexplicable sense of recognition, though he couldn't quite place her. As Julia continued to speak, Alex's gaze lingered on the woman. The longer he looked, the more certain he became. He knew her. It took a moment, but then it hit him like a thunderclap. The woman was Sophie. His heart skipped a beat. Sophie, the woman who had been there for Emmeline in her final days, the one who had uncovered the truth about Emmeline's hidden feelings, the one who had unknowingly ignited the firestorm of doubt and betrayal that had almost consumed him. Alex's pulse quickened as he watched her, trying to make sense of the overwhelming rush of emotions flooding him. He hadn't seen Sophie since the funeral, and he had no idea why she was here now. The last thing he wanted was to dredge up the past. But there she was, sitting across from him like a ghost, stirring up all the unresolved tension that he had tried so hard to leave behind. "Alex, are you okay?" Julia's voice broke through his thoughts, and he turned to her, realizing that he had been staring at Sophie without realizing it. Yeah, he muttered, not wanting to explain. His mind was racing. Why was Sophie here? Was it a coincidence? Or was it fate, somehow bringing him back to that moment of betrayal, back to the uncertainty that had haunted him for so long? Julia raised an eyebrow, sensing his unease. "You sure?" Alex nodded, forcing a smile. "Just lost in thought. I'll be fine." But as the conversation shifted back to the weekend plans, Alex's mind kept returning to Sophie. His stomach churned as he wondered if she had come to see him. Was she here to talk about Emmeline? To stir up old wounds? The next day, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he needed answers. He had tried to avoid confronting the past, tried to move forward, but the sight of Sophie had opened a door he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through. But he couldn't ignore the pull, the need to understand. With a deep breath, he made his decision. He couldn't keep running from the ghosts of the past. It was time to face them head-on. Alex found himself walking into the cafe where Sophie was seated earlier, his footsteps heavy as he made his way through the door. The bell above the entrance jingled softly, and the moment Sophie saw him, her expression shifted. It was a mixture of surprise and something else. Something Alex couldn't quite read. "Alex," Sophie said, standing up from her seat. "I didn't expect to see you here." Neither did I, Alex thought, but he pushed the thought aside. He had come here for answers. "I didn't expect to be here either," he said, his voice steady but edged with tension. "Can we talk?" Sophie hesitated, then nodded. Of course. They found a quiet corner, and Alex sat across from her, his eyes searching her face. Sophie was different than he remembered. She seemed older somehow, more worn by time. but her eyes were still sharp, still hiding something beneath the surface. "I've been thinking about everything lately," Alex said, his voice low. "About what you told me. About Emmeline." Sophie's expression softened, and she looked away for a moment, as though gathering her thoughts. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said quietly, her voice tinged with regret. "I only told you the truth." "The truth?" Alex repeated, his mind swirling. "The truth about Emmeline's feelings? About her love for someone else?" Sophie nodded. "Yes, but it wasn't simple. It was complicated. Emmeline was lost in a way. She was torn between her past and her future, between the person she was with and the person she could never fully be with." Alex's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure he wanted to hear this. "And you think I needed to know that? You think that's what she would have wanted?" Sophie met his gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "I didn't tell you to hurt you, Alex. I told you because you deserved to know. You needed to understand that Emmeline was more than what you thought. She had her own struggles, her own pain. She wasn't just the perfect wife. She was a person with her own desires and dreams. And I think, in the end, she would have wanted you to know that." The words hit him harder than he expected. Alex felt a rush of emotions. Anger, confusion, sadness. But beneath it all, there was something else. Something he had never expected. Understanding. He sat back in his chair, his breath slow and steady as he processed her words. Maybe Emmeline's love for someone else had never been about betrayal. Maybe it had been about her own struggle, her own battle between the past and the future. But that didn't make it any less painful. It didn't erase the scars that had been left behind. As Alex walked away from the cafe later that afternoon, his mind was heavy with the truth Sophie had shared. He didn't have all the answers, and he knew that he never would. But one thing was certain. He was learning to accept the complexity of it all. He couldn't change the past, but he could choose how to move forward. And with Julia by his side, Alex finally believed that he was ready for the next chapter of his life. Chapter 17, The Weight of Choices. The days after Alex's conversation with Sophie were difficult. He had expected the encounter to bring him some kind of clarity, but instead, it only left him with more questions. Emmeline's secrets, the parts of her he had never known, haunted him in ways he hadn't anticipated. But even so, there was a strange sense of release. In hearing Sophie's side of the story, Alex realized that the love he had once thought was flawless was not. It was layered, imperfect, and messy, just like everything else in life. Julia noticed the change in him almost immediately. Though Alex tried to keep his turmoil to himself, his mood shifts were hard to ignore. She was intuitive, patient, and she never pried into his past unless he brought it up himself. But today, as they walked through the city together, she could tell something was weighing heavily on him. "Alex," she began gently, "I know something's been bothering you lately. If you want to talk, I'm here. You don't have to carry this alone." He looked over at her, and for a moment, he saw the warmth in her eyes, the same warmth that had been his anchor in these stormy waters. He smiled softly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know, Julia," he said, his voice heavy. "It's just everything with Emmeline, with Sophie. It's like the pieces of my life are scattered everywhere, and I'm just trying to pick them up, but I don't know where to start." Julia nodded slowly, understanding. "I don't have all the answers, Alex, but I do know that you don't have to put the pieces back in the exact way they were. You're not that person anymore. You've changed. You've grown. And I'm here, right by your side, helping you figure out what comes next." Alex felt a pang in his chest at her words. He knew she was right, but something inside of him, a shadow he couldn't shake, whispered doubts. He had spent so long holding on to the past, to the memory of the love he had lost, that it was hard to imagine a future where he didn't have to carry it with him. That night, as Alex sat in his apartment, he found himself staring at the diary that had started this entire journey. The diary that had belonged to Emmeline. The pages were worn, the edges frayed from the constant flipping through them. He had read it countless times, trying to understand, trying to find answers that would give him peace. But the more he read, the more he realized that there were some things that couldn't be explained by words. He opened to the last entry Emmeline had written, the one that Sophie had read aloud to him, the one that had shaken him to his core. I don't know how to move forward. I love Alex, but there's another part of me that yearns for something more. I don't want to hurt him, but I fear that if I don't follow this path, I'll lose myself completely. I feel torn between two worlds. How can I reconcile these parts of me without losing the people I love? Can I ever be whole again? The words were as painful as they were raw. Alex's heart clenched as he read them once more. He could almost hear Emmeline's voice in his head, see the anguish in her eyes when she had written this. She had been lost in her own way, much like he had been. But she hadn't known how to reach him, how to tell him the truth without breaking him. Tears pricked at the corners of Alex's eyes as he closed the diary and set it down gently. He had never truly understood the weight of her struggle, the battle that had raged inside her. She hadn't been perfect, just as he wasn't. They had both been flawed, but they had loved each other in the only way they knew how. And now he had to decide what to do with all of this. The past was never going to be erased, and the love he had for Emmeline would always be a part of him. But the question was, could he let that love exist alongside the love he felt for Julia? The next day, Julia came over to Alex's apartment for dinner. They had planned a quiet evening, just the two of them, no distractions. As she entered the apartment, her smile faded when she saw his expression. There was something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before, a kind of quiet resignation, as though he was carrying a weight too heavy to bear alone. "Alex?" she asked softly, walking over to him. "What's going on?" Alex took a deep breath and met her gaze. "I've been thinking a lot, about everything, about Emmeline, and you, and how much I've been holding on to. It's hard for me to let go, Julia. I keep thinking that if I just try a little harder, if I just keep holding on to her memory, I'll find the peace I've been searching for. But it's not working." Julia's heart sank as she listened to him. She knew how much he had loved Emmeline, how much it had torn him apart to lose her. And though she had never asked Alex to forget Emmeline, she had hoped, in some quiet corner of her heart, that there would be a day when he could fully embrace their future together. "I don't want you to forget Emmeline," Julia said gently. "I just want you to live in the present, with me. I'm not asking you to erase what came before, but I need to know that I'm not living in the shadow of her memory. I need to know that you're truly here with me and not just living in the past." Her words hit him hard. It was the first time Julia had admitted her own fears, her own uncertainties. She was right. He couldn't keep holding on to the past if he wanted to move forward with her. He couldn't keep living with one foot in yesterday and the other in today. Alex looked at Julia with newfound clarity. He reached out and took her hand in his voice steady and certain. "I want this, Julia. I want us. And I'm sorry for the parts of me that I've held back. I've been afraid that I couldn't love you the way you deserve. But I realize now that I don't have to let go of the past to make room for our future." Julia's eyes softened, and she squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Alex. We'll take this one day at a time. You don't have to have everything figured out today. We'll figure it out together." Alex smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time he was ready to face it. Ready to build something real with Julia. Something that was his, something that wasn't defined by the ghosts of the past. As they sat down to dinner, the air between them felt lighter. There was still much to work through, but Alex knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore, and that was enough to give him hope for what came next. Chapter 18. Unraveling the Past. The days passed with a surprising ease, each one building upon the next like the notes of a soft, unfolding melody. Alex found himself adjusting to the new rhythm of his life with Julia, savoring the moments they shared. There was a gentleness to their days now, a quiet peace that he hadn't known in years. Julia's presence was a balm to the wounds he hadn't even realized were still open. But as the weeks went on, something began to stir inside him again. The weight of the past was never truly gone, and every now and then, a memory of Emmeline would float to the surface of his thoughts. unbidden and strong. It was as though the threads of his old life were still tangled in with the present, and no matter how hard he tried to untangle them, they remained knotted stubborn. One evening, while Julia was preparing dinner in the kitchen, Alex found himself in the study, staring at Emmeline's diary once again. It was there, in the quiet solitude of the room, that he felt the familiar pull of her words. They called to him like a siren song, their weight heavy in his chest. He opened the diary slowly, letting his fingers trace over the delicate pages. The ink faded in some places, but still legible. He had read it all so many times before, but tonight something felt different. It wasn't just the words that he saw. It was the silence between them that filled the room with meaning. This time, instead of reading through it mechanically, he took his time. Each sentence held a new weight, a new significance. He could hear Emmeline's voice in his mind as he read, a voice full of vulnerability, longing, and confusion. She had always been the one who hid her feelings beneath layers, afraid to show her true self. But in these pages, she was raw, exposed. He turned the pages carefully, each one revealing a side of Emmeline he hadn't known. The way she had wrestled with her feelings, the dreams she had held quietly to herself, the parts of her life that had been shaped by things he hadn't been able to see. The truth was painful, but it was also freeing. It allowed him to understand her in a way he hadn't before, to see the woman she had been, and the woman she had wanted to be. But the last entry, asterisk, the one that had shattered him so completely, asterisk, still gnawed at him. It was the one that spoke of her uncertainty, the way she had felt torn between him and someone else. He couldn't help but think that if he had known then, if he had understood what she was going through, maybe things could have turned out differently. Maybe they could have worked through it. His chest tightened, and the familiar ache in his heart flared. Was it wrong to still feel this way about her? Was it wrong to be haunted by her memory, to wish that things had ended differently? Alex! He jumped at the sound of Julia's voice, and in the blink of an eye, he closed the diary and looked up. She stood in the doorway, her expression soft but concerned. "Sorry," he said quickly, his heart racing. "I didn't mean to get lost in thought. I was just looking at Emmeline's things." Julia nodded, stepping into the room and sitting next to him. She didn't need to ask what he was feeling. She could tell by the way his face was drawn, the way his eyes had a faraway look. "You've been doing that a lot lately," she said quietly, her hand resting on his. "Reading her diary, reliving everything. I can't imagine how hard that must be for you." Alex swallowed, trying to steady his breathing. "It's just, there's still so much I don't understand. So much I never got to ask her." Julia squeezed his hand gently. I know that you need answers, but Alex, you have to remember that sometimes we can't get all the answers we're looking for. Sometimes the questions don't have clear answers, and we have to accept that." He nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling over him. It was true. He couldn't keep chasing after something that wasn't there. He couldn't keep searching for meaning in every moment of the past, hoping it would give him peace. The only way forward was to find peace within himself, to stop clinging to the idea that there was some magic moment in the past that would make everything make sense. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft. "I didn't mean to distance myself. Sometimes it feels like I'm stuck." "You're not stuck, Alex," Julia said gently, her eyes meeting his with unwavering support. "You're moving forward one step at a time. It's okay to have moments when the past feels real again. It's okay to miss her, to feel hurt. But just remember that you don't have to carry all of it by yourself. I'm here." For a long moment, Alex sat in silence, his heart heavy with emotion. It was hard to let go of something so deep, something that had shaped so much of who he was. But Julia was right. He didn't have to do it alone. "I'm trying," he said quietly, "but it's harder than I thought." "I know," Julia replied, her voice filled with warmth and understanding. "But you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." Later that night, as they sat together on the couch, Alex felt the familiar pull of uncertainty, the weight of the past tugging at him. He had spent so long trying to understand Emmeline, trying to make sense of everything that had happened between them. But as he looked at Julia, sitting beside him, her hand in his. Something shifted inside him. Maybe the answers he was looking for weren't in the past at all. Maybe they were right here in the present. Julia was his future, not Emmeline. He didn't need to keep trying to rewrite the past to find peace. He didn't need to keep searching for something that would never come. What mattered now, what truly mattered, was what he had with Julia. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. "I'm ready to move forward," Alex said quietly, his voice steady. Julia turned to him, her eyes softening. "You don't have to do it all at once, you know. It's okay to take your time." "I know," Alex replied, his heart lightening for the first time in weeks. "But I want to. I want to be here. With you." Julia smiled, her eyes full of warmth. "Then let's do this. Together." For the first time in a long while, Alex felt a sense of peace settle over him. He wasn't sure what the future would bring, but for the first time, he was ready to embrace it, without the past holding him back. Chapter 19. The Crossroads of Memory and Future. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm, golden glow over the kitchen table where Alex and Julia sat. It was a Saturday, and the world outside felt quieter somehow, as if holding its breath, waiting for something. The coffee between them was warm, the scent rich and comforting, but the air held a certain tension that Alex couldn't shake. For the first time in weeks, he felt the weight of an unspoken question between them, a question that he had been avoiding. He had found peace in his relationship with Julia, but the lingering shadows of the past still had a hold on him. The diary, the secrets Emmeline had kept, the love they had shared. It all felt like unfinished business that he couldn't escape, no matter how much he tried. Julia noticed his distant gaze as he stared into his coffee cup, his fingers tracing the rim absently. She had been patient with him, understanding his struggles, but she also saw the subtle changes in him, how the past still seemed to creep into his present. "Alex," she said softly, her voice breaking through his thoughts. "What's on your mind?" He met her eyes, and for a moment, everything inside him felt still. He could see the kindness in her eyes, the warmth that had drawn him to her in the first place. She was everything he needed right now, strong, supportive, patient. But the question still lingered, unanswered. "I've been thinking," Alex began, his voice low, "about Emmeline, and about everything we went through. I realize I've never truly let go of her. Not completely. And I need to ask myself, what does that mean for us? For our future?" Julia's expression softened. She put her coffee cup down and reached across the table, placing her hand over his. Her touch was grounding, soothing. "I don't expect you to forget her, Alex," she said quietly. "I understand that Emmeline was a huge part of your life, and that's not something that just disappears. But I also know that you've been carrying so much pain, and I don't want you to feel like you have to carry that alone anymore. We don't need to erase her memory, but we also can't live in it forever." He took a deep breath, feeling the tension in his chest begin to ease, even if only a little. Her words were true. He had been stuck in a cycle, torn between holding on to the past and trying to build something new. The truth was, he hadn't given himself the freedom to fully move forward with Julia, because he kept allowing the past to hold him back. "I don't want to live in the past," Alex said slowly, his voice steadying. I guess I've never really understood how to honor both sides of this. How to love someone who's no longer here, while also loving someone who is." Julia smiled, a soft, understanding smile. "You don't have to choose between them, Alex. It's not about loving one person over the other. It's about accepting that love is complicated, and that we're all on our own journeys. You can honor Emmeline's memory while also being fully present with me." The words resonated deeply within him, more than he had expected. It was simple, but it was a truth he had been avoiding. He didn't have to choose between Emmeline's memory and Julia's love. He could make space for both, and in doing so, he could find the freedom to move forward. The past had shaped him, but it didn't have to define him. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being patient with me. I've been so afraid of letting go. But you're right. It's time to let go of the guilt, of the fear. It's time to move forward. With you, Julia squeezed his hand gently, her eyes warm. And I'm here for every step of that journey, Alex. We're in this together. Later that day, Alex found himself standing at the doorstep of Emmeline's parents' house. It had been months since he'd last seen them, and he knew that what he was about to do was important. Perhaps one of the most important things he had done since Emmeline's passing. He had struggled with the idea of reaching out to them for so long, unsure of whether it would bring closure or open up old wounds. But after his conversation with Julia, something inside him told him it was time. Time to face the people who had once been a part of his life in such a profound way. Time to let go of the fear and take responsibility for the unfinished business that lingered between them. As he rang the doorbell, his heart beat a little faster. He didn't know what kind of reception he would receive, but he knew that this step was necessary for his own peace of mind and for the chance to move forward with Julia. When the door opened, it was Emmeline's mother, Claire, who stood there. She looked as though she hadn't changed much in the time since Alex had last seen her, but there was a softness in her eyes, a sorrow that matched his own. "Alex," she said, her voice quiet but warm. "It's good to see you." He smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Hi, Claire. I know it's been a while. I've been working through some things, and I think it's time we talked." Claire stepped aside to let him in, and as he entered the house, the familiar scent of her perfume, of their home, filled him with a strange mix of nostalgia and sadness. They sat down in the living room, the same room where so many of their conversations had taken place years ago. Felt different now, though. He was no longer the young man in love with Emmeline, uncertain of his place in her world. He was someone else now, someone who had been broken and rebuilt, someone who had learned to love again. "I've been thinking a lot," Alex said, his voice steady, "about Emmeline, about everything, and I realized that there are things I never had the chance to say, to you, to her. Things I need to say, if that makes sense." Claire nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "I think I understand more than you know, Alex." For the next hour they spoke about Emmeline, about the life they had shared, about the things that had gone unsaid. There were tears, but there was also laughter, as they remembered the good times, the moments that had made them all feel alive and connected. When Alex finally stood to leave, something had shifted within him. The conversation hadn't provided all the answers he'd hoped for, but it had allowed him to forgive himself, to let go of the guilt and confusion that had weighed on him for so long. It had allowed him to embrace the fact that the past, while important, no longer had to hold him captive. As he drove back to Julia's apartment, the setting sun casting a golden light over the road ahead, Alex realized that he was finally ready to let the past rest. He had faced it, understood it, and now it was time to move forward. With Julia, with his future, and with the knowledge that love, though complicated, could still lead him to the life he had always dreamed of. And as he pulled into the parking lot, his heart felt lighter than it had in years. The crossroads had come, and he had chosen the path forward. Chapter 20. A New Beginning. The days following his visit to Emmeline's parents felt different. Alex felt a quiet shift within himself, as though the weight of the past, which had once seemed so oppressive, had been eased just enough to allow space for something new to grow. He had faced the remnants of his old life, and now it was time to fully embrace the future with Julia. The night air was cool as he walked into their apartment, his steps slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. Julia was sitting on the couch, her legs curled up under a blanket, her eyes focused on a book. She looked up as he entered, and a soft smile played on her lips. "How did it go?" she asked gently, setting the book down on the coffee table. She had known that the visit to Emmeline's parents was important to him, and she had been waiting for him to come home, knowing he needed space to process everything. Alex met her gaze, and for the first time in a long while, he felt completely certain of what he needed to say. "It was good," he said, his voice calm. "I think I've finally come to terms with everything. With Emmeline. With the past." Julia's smile grew warmer, and she patted the space beside her on the couch. "I'm glad you feel that way. You've been carrying so much weight for so long, Alex. You deserve to feel light again." He sat down beside her, his heart feeling full, yet light at the same time. He could feel her warmth beside him, the quiet reassurance of her presence, and it made everything seem so much clearer. It wasn't easy, he continued, his voice soft, but I think I'm ready now, to be here, with you. Julia looked at him, her eyes filled with tenderness. You don't have to rush this, you know. We have time. There's no need to hurry. We'll take it one day at a time, however long it takes. He nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. She had never pressured him to move faster, never asked him to forget Emmeline. She had simply given him the space to heal, to grow. And in doing so, she had become a pillar of strength in his life, someone who would stand by him as he navigated this journey. As the days turned into weeks, Alex found himself slowly shedding the remnants of his past. He still thought of Emmeline, still cherished the good memories they had shared, but they no longer had the same hold on him. Instead, he looked forward to what lay ahead, the future he had with Julia, the life they were beginning to build together. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Alex turned to Julia, a thought forming in his mind. Do you ever think about the future? He asked, his voice thoughtful. Julia smiled and leaned back, her eyes turned toward the horizon. I do. I think about it all the time, about where we'll be in 5 years, 10 years. And honestly, Alex, I see us together in all of it. I see us building a life, making memories, growing old together. His heart swelled at her words. For so long, he had been haunted by the past, by the memories of a love that had been lost, by the question of whether he could ever find a future again. But in that moment, with Julia beside him, the answer seemed clear. He had found his future. It was here, in the quiet moments they shared, in the life they were building together, and in the love that had grown between them despite everything. I'm ready for that, Alex said, his voice steady. For the future with you. I'm ready to see where this journey takes us. Julia's eyes sparkled with a mix of joy and anticipation. We'll take it one step at a time, Alex. But I know that whatever happens, we'll face it together. That's all that matters. And with that, Alex knew she was right. He had spent so long running from his past, so long caught in the memories of a love that had slipped through his fingers. But now, for the first time, he was looking ahead with hope, with excitement for what the future held. He was no longer weighed down by the burden of unanswered questions or unhealed wounds. He had healed, and in doing so, he had found something even more precious, an unshakable sense of peace. Together, they watched the stars come into view, each one twinkling like a promise, a sign that the future was full of endless possibilities. The journey was just beginning, and Alex was ready to walk it, side by side with Julia, with a heart open to love again.